Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. DarXnights. I know many of you use these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before you drift off, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's get comfortable and begin. The first story is The Disappearing Precinct. They told Officer Eli Mercer that the precinct had been rebuilt from the ground up. That the old one, the one from 1977, had burned down, suffered from unstable foundation issues, and was ultimately condemned. They said the new one was modern, state-of-the-art radios, upgraded dispatch systems, reinforced concrete, thermal sensors, and biometric locks. That it was just a building, nothing more. No legacy, no ghost, just a replacement. But Eli had heard rumors before accepting the transfer. He was fresh out of academy training, eager to make a difference, yet cautious after reading between the lines of a job no one wanted. Officers assigned to County Precinct 47 didn't stick around long. There was no violence, no corruption, no internal drama. They just left. Some asked to be reassigned, others just quit the force entirely. The turnover rate was high, yet no disciplinary cases had ever been filed. Nothing public, just a revolving door of rookies and short-timers. And yet the department insisted it was a perfect post to start a career, quiet, uneventful, routine. Eli took it anyway. He drove through mist and dead autumn trees for 3 hours, his tires cracking along the gravel road leading to the precinct. It stood alone at the end of a sloped hill, surrounded by skeletal pine trees. The building was newer than he expected. Whitewashed brick, bulletproof glass, clean signage that read, County Precinct 47. But it was too quiet. No traffic, no movement. The lights were on, but it looked like no one had arrived in weeks. Inside, everything looked normal. Filing cabinets, a dispatch desk, a coffee machine still half full of burned residue, and 2 rows of metal lockers with nameplates long faded. Dust lined the corners, but someone had clearly mopped recently. Still, the air held a kind of hollowness Eli couldn't define. Like the place had been waiting too long for someone to walk back in. The first shift passed like a dream. No calls, no visitors. Just Eli alone in the station reviewing case files and organizing supplies. At 3:15 a.m., he fell asleep in the small bunk room beside the locker hall. The next morning, he logged his shift and returned to the motel on the edge of town where the department had set him up temporarily. He didn't even question the quiet. But the second night, things changed. At exactly 2:41 a.m., the radio crackled. He hadn't touched it. He hadn't received any dispatches all night. There was no one else on duty, but the static buzzed to life, soft and slow like something waking up. He sat up in his chair, blinking the sleep from his eyes, unsure if the noise was real or some artifact of being half-dreaming. Then a voice, low, raspy, almost mechanical, as if torn through layers of static and time. Station 47, respond. He reached for the receiver, the hairs on his arm rising. It was an automatic response, protocol drilled into him at the academy. But as he lifted the mic, he paused. Copy, this is Officer Mercer. Receiving transmission. Please identify. Silence. Then more static. Then a breath. Not a word. Not even interference. Just the sound of someone breathing directly into the other side of the line. He dropped the mic. The breath stopped the second he released it. He waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Nothing else came through. He blamed the signal towers. Rural stations sometimes picked up odd frequencies or garbled emergency alerts from nearby counties. Still, he noted it in the logbook. The next night, 2:41 a.m. came again. And again, the radio crackled. This time it was a whisper, like someone barely pressing the mic on their end. He's inside now. Eli sat completely still. The radio was analog, and they'd installed it just 3 years ago. There was no recording device inside it, no file to play back. No auto messages. No test signal at that time. Just the voice. Male. Tired. Distant. He clicked the mic again. Who is this? This is Officer Mercer. Identify yourself. Nothing. Just a long, drawn-out exhale. He replayed the whisper in his head again and again. He's inside now. Inside where? The station? A house? Himself? He didn't sleep that night. The following morning, he asked the department's tech specialist if there were any old recordings that could be accidentally triggered. "Nope," the man replied. "Those systems are all digital now. That station still uses analog, completely separate from dispatch. No pre-recorded messages. If you're hearing voices, it's either a prank or someone nearby with a strong transmitter." But when Eli asked to trace the origin, he was told there was no source. No matching signal was ever picked up by central dispatch. That night, he didn't go to the bunk room. He stayed at the desk, staring at the radio as the clock ticked slowly toward 2:41 a.m. It arrived without drama, just the same hum. This time there were multiple voices, all whispering, all speaking at once. Names, badge numbers, screaming in whispers. Reed, Collins, 1197. Gone, buried, precinct, burned. Then, clear as day, through the noise. He's inside, then silence. Eli stood slowly, flashlight in hand, and walked through the precinct halls. The break room was empty. The locker hall was unchanged. The bunk room still had the bed folded from his first night. Then he saw it. One of the locker doors was ajar. He hadn't opened it. He approached cautiously, every muscle tensed. The badge on the locker had a name he didn't recognize. T. Collins. The metal around it was rusted slightly, almost like it had been there for decades. Inside, neatly folded, was an old police uniform. Not the modern kind. The stitching, the style, it looked like it was from the 1970s. Dust covered the shoulders. A pair of worn boots sat underneath, still crusted with dried mud. And next to the boots, handcuffs, the old iron kind. Heavy, rusted, real. He reached down and touched the boots. They were warm. Suddenly the lights flickered. All of them, hallway, office, dispatch room. Every light in the building blinked once. Then once more. Then steady. He returned to the main room. The clock read 2:57 a.m. The radio was dead silent. And on the desk in front of him, something had been placed without a sound. A case file. The folder was thick, labeled in old handwriting, Reed, Thomas, Officer 002. The file included an incident report from 1977. The print was faded, the photos grainy black and white. There was a crime scene, dark, burned rubble, a melted police badge half visible beneath debris. The last page contained a single sentence, typed, "Last transmission received. He's inside now. All officers unaccounted for." He read the report twice. Then he looked around the room, suddenly aware of how quiet the precinct had become. No wind, no ticking, no hum from the radio, only silence, as if the building were holding its breath. He shoved the file into a drawer and locked it. When dawn came, he left the precinct and drove an hour out of town just to get coffee. He needed the noise, the cars, the people, anything to remind him that the world still existed outside that station. But when he returned the next night, something was different. The lights didn't turn on at first. He had to flip the main breaker in the back. The air was heavier, warmer, but only in pockets, like certain corners of the building were breathing. And when he went back to the locker, another door was open. Another old uniform. Another name, M. Reed. 2 lockers now. 2 sets of warm boots. 2 pairs of rusted cuffs. Eli didn't open them again. He closed the door, locked the locker room, and sat at the desk with the radio unplugged. But at 2:41 a.m., it turned on anyway, with no power, with no transmission tower active, with no one holding the receiver. And this time, the voice wasn't distant. It was right behind him. Eli didn't move. The voice had come from behind him. Close, so close it tickled the small hairs on his neck. But when he turned around, the room was empty. No shadows, no figures, just the soft hum of a light bulb above the dispatch desk flickering gently, as if disturbed by a gust of wind that never came. He waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. He scanned every corner of the station, flashlight in hand, checking each hallway, every room, the stairwell, the basement access, though he was certain there was no basement when he first toured the place. Still, the air vent in the floor behind the evidence room had felt off. Too large, like it once led somewhere deeper. He returned to his seat and stared at the unplugged radio. The speaker was silent now, dark and cold. In the early hours of dawn, Eli packed the strange case file and stuffed it into his backpack. He wasn't supposed to remove precinct property, but he needed to read it in daylight, away from this place. It didn't feel like a police report. It felt like a confession. At the motel, he scanned every page by hand, then loaded the scanned pages onto a secured cloud server, just in case he disappeared like the others. The report was filed October 2nd, 1977, under the name of Chief Harlan Voss. It documented a sudden radio blackout from County Precinct 47. The last received communication was a transmission stating, "He's inside now." No officers responded afterward. The county sent in search teams the next day. They found nothing. No building, no rubble, just trees, grass, wild overgrowth, as if the precinct had never existed. No one could explain it. No explosions, no burn site, just blank land where, 2 days earlier, a building had stood. The report was marked classified under a strange set of initials, BOD. No expansion, no explanation. That morning, Eli submitted a request to review archived precinct blueprints. He didn't expect a reply, but within the hour, he got one. A single line in an auto-generated email. Unauthorized request for a non-existent property. That night, he debated skipping his shift entirely. But he didn't. He went back. Something inside him, the same thing that drove him into the force, the same thing that once made him chase a suspect into a burning warehouse in Detroit, compelled him. Not courage, not duty, something else, something he couldn't name. A silent pull. The station looked unchanged from the outside. Quiet. Fog curling around the windows like pale fingers. But as soon as he stepped inside, he knew something had shifted. The air was heavier. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the memory of movement. He could feel it in the walls like pressure, like a storm rolling in, but the wind hadn't arrived yet. He flicked the lights on. Nothing. The switch clicked, but no lights responded. He pulled his flashlight and scanned the lobby. It was intact. Chairs aligned, coffee table centered, dust floating in the beam. But then he noticed something different. The floor tiles near the door had changed. They weren't white anymore. They were black and white checkered, just like the photos from the 1977 file. He walked deeper into the precinct, light trembling slightly in his grip. At the far end of the hallway, a door stood open that wasn't there the night before. A room that hadn't existed. Inside was an office, wooden desk, rotary phone, file cabinets made of dark iron. A black and white photo hung on the wall. A group of officers in vintage uniforms, arms around each other, faces blurred by age. The date etched into the frame, September 1977. On the desk sat a single sheet of yellowed paper, brittle with time. Eli unfolded it. It read, "If you see this room, IT means it's begun again." He dropped the paper and backed out of the office. The hallway seemed longer now, the walls narrower. He hurried back to the main room, flipped the breaker switches. The lights returned, blinking into life, but flickered with a dull orange glow, not white. Dimmer, older, as if time inside the building had regressed slightly. The clock on the wall, once digital, was now analog. The desks had changed shape. Even the chairs were different, wooden with green cushions, not the plastic kind from before. His heart pounded harder with each step. He opened the locker room again. 3 lockers now stood open. 3 uniforms. 3 sets of boots. All warm. The names on the plaques. T. Collins. Reed. Voss. Chief Voss. The man who filed the last report. Eli reached into the chief's locker and pulled out a black leather-bound journal tucked behind a uniform jacket. Its pages were yellowed, but the handwriting inside was clear. The entries were disturbing. Day 3, we keep hearing the voice. At first just static, then whispers, then names, then screams. Day 5, rooms are appearing that weren't there. A second evidence room. A deeper cell in the back. All old, dusty, as if they'd always been here. Day 7, Officer Reed swears he saw someone in the mirror behind the holding cell. Not his own reflection. Someone older, in uniform, watching him. Day 10 we tried to leave. None of us could. Doors open, but we end up back inside. Time runs differently here. Day 12, we're not alone in here. Eli flipped through page after page of notes. Frantic, inconsistent, some with scratched out words, some with ink smeared by what looked like blood. The final entry read, Day 14, he's inside now. That night, Eli didn't sit by the desk. He waited in the hallway, facing the dispatch room, his back to the evidence room door, gun holstered but ready. At 2:41 a.m., the air dropped by 15 degrees. His breath steamed in the flashlight's beam. The radio clicked on. No static this time, just the sound of footsteps. Walking, closer. He couldn't see anyone, but the steps echoed, loud, deliberate, pacing across the tiles toward him. Then they stopped. A moment passed, and then, through the radio speaker, in a voice not human, not machine, but something in between, Your shift has started, Officer Mercer. Eli raised his flashlight, aiming it at the dispatch window. The glass reflected something behind him. A figure, standing at the far end of the hallway. He turned fast, flashlight shaking, but the hallway was empty. When he turned back, the reflection was gone. But the door to the evidence room was now open, and light was pouring out of it. He approached slowly. The room had changed entirely. It was no longer filled with modern equipment or chain lockers. It looked like a morgue. Slabs of metal tables, freezer units along the back, old rusted tools, tags, body tags, each one labeled T. Collins, expired October 2nd, 77. M. Reed, expired October 2nd, 77. H. Voss, expired October 2nd, 77. And one more. Mercer, expired, blank. He stared at it, trembling. Then the door behind him slammed shut. The lights turned off. Total darkness. The air shifted again. Heavy, rotten, breathing. He was not alone in that room. He pressed his back against the freezer wall and aimed the flashlight at the floor. There were footprints, wet, leading toward him. Then the voice came again. Not from the radio this time, from the walls. Every shift, another comes. He bolted. He didn't care what he saw or didn't see. He ran straight through the door, down the hallway, past the dispatch desk, slamming into the lobby and bursting out into the fogged night. The cool air hit him like a wall. He didn't stop until he reached his car. When he looked back, the precinct lights had all gone dark, and the sign above the door no longer read County Precinct 47. It read County Precinct 13. The number wasn't just wrong, it had never existed. He drove for hours. He didn't go back to the motel. He didn't call in sick. He didn't even turn his phone on. He just kept driving. And still, somewhere deep inside the static of his car radio, at 2:41 a.m., a voice whispered, "You're not off duty yet." The road didn't end. Eli had been driving for hours, at least that's what the clock said, but nothing changed. Just the same narrow two-lane highway slicing through thick woods. No road signs, no mile markers, no cars passing him either direction. Fog clung to his windows like sweat, and even his GPS stopped functioning the moment he hit the tree line again. He tried turning back. No use. Every turn seemed to fold back on itself. The trees were always the same, like a carousel of dead pines spinning slowly around him. His phone battery died before midnight. By 1 a.m., he saw the lights again, those flickering orange lights that shouldn't be there. The precinct. Somehow, it stood just off the highway like it had always been there, despite him driving away from it for nearly 6 hours. But something was different this time. The building looked older, much older. Moss crept up the walls. Windows were cracked, some missing. The police car outside, once his own, was now a rusted-out husk, flat tires, windshield broken. He didn't remember leaving it like that. He wanted to scream. He wanted to believe this was a dream, a feverish nightmare brought on by stress or lack of sleep. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. This place was real, and it wanted him back. He stepped toward the entrance. The door creaked open before he could touch it. Inside, the station had shifted again. Gone were the cheap vinyl floors and modern chairs. In their place were creaking wooden floorboards, typewriters, and a single dim ceiling fan spinning slowly, squeaking with each rotation. The calendar on the wall said, October 3rd, 1977. He checked his watch. It still read 2025. He didn't know which to believe anymore. As he walked further in, the walls began to whisper. Not loud enough to form words, but just barely audible, like dozens of voices speaking from the other side of the drywall. Children, men, some sobbing, others laughing. The sound made his skin crawl. He returned to the locker room. His name was now etched onto a fourth locker. Immersive. Inside were items that didn't belong to him. A badge he'd never seen before with a serial number from the 70s, a pair of keys, and a notebook labeled Observed Phenomena, Week 3. The first page read, If you're reading this, you're already inside. It won't let you go until someone takes your place. He closed it slowly. The desk phone rang. Old rotary, loud and sharp. He didn't want to answer it, but he did. County Precinct, he started to say, but the voice on the other end cut him off. Where were you tonight, Officer Mercer? It was a man's voice, stern, familiar. Eli hesitated. Who is this? The line clicked. He looked down and saw the receiver wasn't even connected to the base. The voice had come from nowhere. Behind the desk, the door to the evidence room opened by itself again. Eli stepped in, this time prepared. The morgue-like room had grown. More slabs, more names. Each tag was printed now, not handwritten. A printer hummed softly in the corner, spitting out a new tag every few seconds. He picked one up. A. Murphy, expired 2004, joined precinct, 2004. Another. R. Delaney, expired 2011, joined precinct, 2011. Dozens of names, dozens of years. The pattern was obvious. One officer every few years. Each had joined. Each had expired. He looked around the room and noticed a black smear on the floor leading into the back wall, like someone had been dragged. He followed it, pressed his hand to the cold tile, and the wall gave way, not like a secret door, not like a movie. The wall rippled liquid-like, thick and slow like tar, and then it let him through. He stumbled into darkness. The floor beneath him vanished, and he dropped into blackness, no sound, no air, just falling, falling, falling. Then he hit cold stone. He groaned, looked around. A hallway stretched before him, lined with doors. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper and flickering candles, nailed into sconces that hadn't been used in decades. Above each door, a plaque. Names. Each one a cop. Each one someone who'd vanished. He walked past dozens of doors, until he saw his own. Mercer. He opened it. Inside was a perfect replica of his apartment. His actual apartment in Detroit. Same couch, same books, same coat thrown across the chair. Except something was wrong. He stepped closer to the bookshelf. Every photo frame showed a version of him, but with different uniforms. Fireman, paramedic, military, security. In one, he was wearing a suit and tie, standing beside a casket. All the faces around him were blacked out. He backed away, heart pounding. On the table sat a newspaper clipping. The headline, Officer Eli Mercer missing in rural county, last seen March 12, 2025. He read the date again. That was tomorrow. He hadn't gone missing yet, but the story was already printed. That's when he heard the knocking. Not on the front door. From inside the closet. He turned. Another knock. Louder. He approached, trembling. Opened it. A mirror. A tall, antique mirror with a silver frame. In the reflection, he didn't see himself. He saw Chief Harlan Voss. Older. Haggard. Blood on his chin. Get out, the reflection whispered. While you still can. Eli blinked. Now the mirror showed himself. But behind him, something moved. A shadow. Large. Shifting like smoke. He turned, nothing there. When he looked back, the mirror was cracked. The room was no longer his apartment. It was the station again. Only now, it was buried under dirt. He clawed at the door and burst out into the hallway again. But the hallway was crumbling. Doors were breaking apart. The walls groaned. The entire structure was sinking. Somewhere deep inside, he could hear dozens, maybe hundreds of voices screaming, calling his name. Mercer! He ran. He ran past doors labeled with names that didn't stay static. Each time he passed one, the name morphed, changed, until all of them said, E. Mercer. He screamed. Then silence. Pure silence. He was back in the evidence room, standing exactly where he had been. The door closed behind him gently. He looked at his hands. They were covered in dust. But the room looked as if nothing had happened. Had he imagined it all? His radio crackled. Then a voice, this one familiar. Eli? It was Officer Ramirez, his old partner from Detroit. Where the hell are you, man? Eli's eyes widened. Ramirez? How are you? Dispatch said you missed your shift. Nobody's heard from you. You okay? Eli's throat tightened. I don't know, he said hoarsely. I don't know where I am. Can you send me a pin? He pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course. I can't. I think I'm trapped. Eli, listen. You need to get out of there. Something weird's going on. Chief sent some people to check out that station you got assigned to, but there's nothing there. They just found a concrete slab. No building. No records. I'm inside it right now, Eli said quietly. Silence. Eli, that's not possible. The line died. He stared at the radio. Then, for the first time since he arrived, he looked up at the precinct ceiling. There were names etched into it. Hundreds of them, all in block letters. And slowly, almost delicately, a new name began carving itself beside the last one. Mercer. Blood leaked from the fresh carving like ink. He stumbled back, heart hammering, sweat pouring down his face. And then, a scream echoed from down the hall. A child's scream. No, more than that. A child calling his name. Eli 3. High-pitched, terrified. He didn't think. He just ran toward it. Toward the hallway that wasn't there yesterday. Toward the part of the station that shouldn't exist. And as he passed the old case board hanging beside the hallway, he saw it had one new photo tacked to it. His eyes hollowed, face pale, and the caption beneath it said, Case closed. The hallway shouldn't have existed. Eli knew the station's layout by now, had memorized every crooked hallway, every misplaced desk, every busted lock. But this corridor was new, or maybe it had always been here, waiting for the right moment to open itself. It stretched out in a way that defied logic, longer on the inside than the building's footprint should allow. The walls pulsed like lungs, breathing in and out with a sickly rhythm. The overhead lights buzzed dimly, casting shadows that twitched and jerked as if they had their own thoughts. The child's voice echoed again. Eli. He moved forward slowly, his footsteps muffled by the worn carpet that shouldn't have been there. Doors lined the hallway, unmarked, rotting slightly at the edges, each with a single peephole at eye level. He tried one. Locked. The next. Locked. The third creaked open on its own. Inside, a single chair, bolted to the center of the room. A tape recorder sat on it. He pressed play. The tape hissed, then clicked. A voice spoke. A woman's voice, weary, frightened. It doesn't want you to remember. That's how it feeds. Each of us forgets where we came from until we belong only to the building. Another click. Another voice. A deep male growl. You can't leave. You never left. You were always part of the station. He slammed the tape shut and backed out, breath-catching. Something moved at the end of the hallway. A flicker of motion, tall and thin. He called out, "Hello!" No answer. He moved closer. Each step forward made the air thicker, as if the atmosphere had turned to syrup. Time slowed. His limbs felt sluggish. He touched the wall to steady himself, and it pulsed under his hand, like living skin. He reached the last door. A plaque had been nailed onto it hastily. Interview Room 3, Mercer. He stared at it, heart pounding. He hadn't made it. He hadn't even seen this room before. But the building had already claimed it in his name. He turned the knob. It was open. Inside, the child sat on the floor, thin, pale, eyes wide and glassy. The boy looked about 8. Dirty shirt, torn jeans. He looked up at Eli. "You found me." Eli stepped in cautiously. "Who are you?" The child didn't answer at first. He just reached into his pocket and held out a badge. An old police badge. Officer M. Teller. Eli recognized the name from the old file he had seen in the archives. Teller had gone missing in 1977. "You're Teller?" he asked. The boy nodded slowly. "Part of him. What's left?" Eli knelt down. "What is this place?" "The station doesn't serve the town anymore," the boy whispered. "It serves him." "Who?" The boy pointed to the walls. A low rumble started, like something stirring in deep water. The wallpaper peeled back on its own, curling like dead skin. Behind it, black stone. Carved into the stone were faces. Dozens of them. Men, women, children, all screaming. And then, the stone blinked. It was alive. The boy grabbed Eli's arm. "He's awake now. He knows you're here." The lights shattered. Pitch black. Eli pulled out his flashlight. The child was gone. In his place, a radio clicked on. "We've got a 10 to 7, Officer Mercer. You're off duty now." His name repeated in distorted voices. "Mercer, Mercer, Mercer." The walls cracked. The floor groaned. Eli ran. Back through the hallway. Doors burst open on either side. Arms reached out. Twisted, gray arms with fingers too long, too sharp. They grasped at him, tearing his uniform, slicing skin. He broke free and stumbled into the lobby. But it had changed again. Now it looked like the ruins of an ancient church. Stone pews, pulpit, and behind it, Chief Harlan Voss, or what was left of him. His face was hollowed out, stretched thin like parchment. His eyes burned with amber light. "You should never have come here," he rasped. "What is this place?" Eli screamed. Voss tilted his head. "It was a sanctuary once. Then it became a prison. Now it's a feeding ground." "For who?" Voss stepped aside. Behind him, the stone wall opened like a yawning mouth. A shape emerged. Massive. Not human. Not beast. It moved like smoke trapped in glass. Always shifting, always writhing. It had no face. Only hundreds of eyes scattered across its body, watching, blinking. Voss whispered, "The Watcher." Eli stepped back. "The building is him," Voss said. "He wears the station like skin. He collects us. Each officer who steps in becomes another stitch in his uniform." Eli ran. Back through the evidence room. Back through the locker hallway. Back to the front door. It wouldn't open. Chains wrapped around it now. Chains that hadn't been there before. His own badge hung from one. He yanked at the chains, screaming. And then, suddenly, silence. The door creaked open. Outside, daylight. Just like that, he stumbled out, blinded by the sun. Grass, birds, sky. The station behind him was gone. Only a slab of concrete remained. No building, no door, no sign it had ever been there. He collapsed to his knees. He was free, he thought. But when he looked down at his hands, they were made of stone. Smooth gray, veined with cracks. His skin was no longer skin. He screamed, but no sound came. And then, he was back inside. Same desk, same chair, typewriter waiting. Calendar, October 3rd, 1977. He was behind the desk now. A nameplate before him. Sergeant Mercer. The door opened. A rookie cop walked in. Nervous. Young. He looked around, confused. Reporting for shift, sir?" Eli smiled, stood slowly, and said, "Welcome to the precinct, officer. We've been expecting you." Second story, The Third Officer. It was a cold, quiet night when Officer Harris and Officer Daniels made their routine patrol through the city. The streets were nearly deserted, with only the occasional passing car disrupting the calm stillness. Their cruiser's headlights sliced through the fog that hung low over the roads, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. The radio crackled with static now and then, but it was mostly silent, just as it always was during their shift. The night had always felt like this, endless, monotonous. For Harris and Daniels, it was just another graveyard shift, the kind they'd become numb to over the years. The patrol route remained the same. Check the usual spots, respond to any calls, and wait for the clock to tick away. Except tonight, something was different. At first, it was a subtle feeling, almost unnoticeable. They didn't talk much as they drove through the empty streets. Harris kept his eyes on the road, occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror, while Daniels stared out the passenger window, his mind seemingly miles away. Then, the shift started to feel a little heavier. The hairs on Harris's neck stood up, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Daniels was the first to notice it. "You ever feel like something's watching us?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. Harris glanced over at him, eyebrows furrowing. "What are you talking about?" "I don't know," Daniels muttered, scratching his head. "Just, something's weird tonight. Don't know how to explain it." Harris shrugged. "It's just the usual night shift vibe. You're overthinking it." But as the words left his mouth, he too felt it, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. It was as though a pair of unseen eyes were following them through the darkened streets. It wasn't the usual creepiness that came with patrolling an empty town. This was something more unsettling. A sudden click of the radio interrupted their uneasy silence. "This is dispatch," came the crackling voice. "We've got a report of suspicious activity near the old warehouse on 5th and Elm. Unit 33, please investigate." Harris glanced at Daniels. "That's our turn." They turned the cruiser toward 5th and Elm, the streetlights flickering as they passed under them. The old warehouse loomed in the distance, its windows dark and empty, the door hanging slightly ajar. The air around it felt colder, and Harris could feel the tension in the pit of his stomach. They pulled up beside the building, the cruiser's lights flashing in the night. The only sound now was the faint hum of the engine and the distant chirp of crickets. "Let's check it out," Harris said, his hand instinctively reaching for his flashlight. Daniels nodded, but as he stepped out of the cruiser, something caught his attention. He turned to look at the rearview mirror, his breath catching in his throat. There, standing just outside the warehouse, was a figure, a third officer. He was dressed in full uniform, the badge gleaming in the low light, his face obscured by the darkness. His posture was rigid, unnervingly so, as if he were waiting for them. "Who the hell is that?" Daniels muttered under his breath. Harris followed his gaze, but the figure was gone. "What? Where did he go?" Harris asked, looking back at the empty street behind them. Daniels shook his head. "I swear I saw someone standing there. He was just there." Harris frowned. "You've been working too many hours. Let's focus." They moved toward the warehouse entrance, the door creaking slightly as they pushed it open. The inside was dark, filled with shadows that seemed to stretch on forever. The faint scent of dust and decay filled the air, and Harris could feel the hairs on the back of his neck rise again. They searched the building for a few minutes, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. But there was no sign of anyone or anything inside. "This place is empty," Harris said, the edge of irritation creeping into his voice. Daniels gave him a skeptical look. "I don't know, man. I could have sworn I saw someone standing outside. Let's just call it in and move on." "We've got nothing here," Harris said, already pulling out his radio. As he spoke into the mic, Daniels continued to scan the area. But then something caught his eye. A monitor in the corner of the room. It flickered on, showing footage of their cruiser parked outside. Both officers could see themselves standing in front of the warehouse, the camera angle slightly off, as if someone had moved it recently. "Did you turn that on?" Daniels asked. Harris shook his head. "No, let's check it out." They walked over to the monitor, and both of them froze as they saw something strange. There, on the footage, standing beside the cruiser, was the third officer again. He was positioned just outside the warehouse, right beside their car. Except this time, Daniels could see his face more clearly, cold, emotionless, and completely unfamiliar. "Who the hell is that guy?" Daniels whispered. Harris's eyes narrowed. "There's no record of anyone like him. We'd know if there was a new recruit." The footage continued to play, showing the third officer standing motionless next to their vehicle, just staring at the camera. His eyes were fixed on the lens, and his posture was unnervingly stiff, as if he were frozen in time. "This is wrong," Daniels said, stepping away from the monitor. "We need to figure this out. Now." Harris was already on the radio calling dispatch. "This is Unit 33. We need a check on officer records. There's someone on our footage who isn't supposed to be here. He's not in the system." The radio crackled to life. "Unit 33, please confirm the name of the officer you're referring to." Harris paused, his stomach churning. "We don't know his name. We can't find any record of him." There was a long silence, and then the voice on the radio responded with a hint of confusion. "Unit 33, there's no record of any officer accompanying you tonight. Only you two are on duty." Harris turned to Daniels, his mind racing. What the hell is going on? Daniels was staring at the monitor again. The third officer was still there, unmoving. But now the officer was writing something on a clipboard in his hand. Slowly, methodically. He wasn't writing anything in particular. It was just a list of names. But as Daniels squinted at the screen, one name stood out to him. It was Harris's name, Officer Harris. The chill that ran down his spine was immediate. He turned to Harris. "Look at the screen." Harris's eyes widened in disbelief. Before they could react, the monitor cut to black. The radio crackled again, but this time, all they could hear was static. And then, the sound of someone breathing. The following days felt like a blur. Harris couldn't shake the image of the third officer, his cold, vacant eyes staring back at them from the monitor. He tried to push it from his mind, but the memory was like a shadow, always looming over him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that officer, standing motionless beside the cruiser. The unsettling feeling of being watched never truly left. That night, he and Daniels were back on patrol. The unease that had settled into the pit of Harris's stomach hadn't subsided. As they cruised through the same quiet streets, the radio remained eerily silent. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the car, and it did nothing to calm the growing tension. Daniels broke the silence, his voice low and unsure. "Do you think we imagined it? The whole thing with the officer?" Harris glanced at him. "I don't know, man, but it wasn't just the footage. We heard it too. That breathing sound." Daniels nodded slowly. "Yeah, but I can't stop thinking about it. The whole thing feels off. Like we're not supposed to be looking at it. Maybe we just got too freaked out," Harris suggested, trying to sound convincing. "But I can't explain the footage. The guy didn't show up anywhere in the system." Daniels was silent for a moment before he spoke again. "I keep wondering if we're missing something. What if that officer isn't just a figment of our imagination? What if he's something more?" Harris didn't respond immediately. His grip on the steering wheel tightened as he navigated the streets. The lights of the city seemed too bright, too harsh in the silence that surrounded them. The feeling of being watched still hung in the air, thick like fog, and Harris couldn't shake the sense that they were being drawn into something far darker than they understood. As they approached the old warehouse again, the cruiser's headlights illuminated the familiar, eerie structure. For a moment, everything seemed normal, too normal. But Harris couldn't help but notice the shadow of the building, stretching unnaturally long under the harsh lights. Daniels let out a low sigh. "Not this place again. You think the third officer's here? Why don't you go check for yourself?" Harris replied, his tone sharp. He wasn't in the mood for this game, but Daniels didn't seem to notice. Without waiting for Harris's response, Daniels opened the door and stepped out. Harris followed suit reluctantly, his footsteps echoing in the quiet street. The night was still, and the air had grown colder. Every movement felt slow, as though time itself had decided to drag its feet. They approached the warehouse door, which creaked open with a groan. Harris shined his flashlight across the dark interior, but everything seemed to be just as it had been the night before. Empty, abandoned, save for the shadows that played along the walls. No sign of anyone or anything unusual. "Nothing here," Harris said, his voice low. He turned back to Daniels. "Let's get out of here." But Daniels wasn't listening. He was staring at the corner of the room, his face pale. "Daniels?" Harris asked, his heart skipping a beat. Daniels turned slowly, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Harris, I swear I saw something." "What are you talking about?" Harris asked, stepping closer. "There." Daniels pointed to the corner of the room. There was someone standing there. I saw him. I know I did. Harris turned toward the corner, but there was nothing. Just the flickering of the overhead light and the shadows stretching across the walls. "You're losing it, man," Harris muttered. "There's nothing here. You've been working too many shifts." But Daniels didn't look convinced. He shook his head, his eyes still locked on the corner. "No, Harris. There was someone. I saw him. The officer. The one from the footage." Harris felt a chill run down his spine. "Daniels, that doesn't make any sense. He wasn't there. We would have seen him." Daniels didn't respond. He stepped toward the corner, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Harris followed reluctantly, his hand instinctively reaching for his radio. He felt like he needed to be ready for something, though he couldn't put his finger on what. When they reached the corner, Harris felt his stomach tighten. There was something different about this room. The air felt heavier, thicker. And then he saw it just like Daniels had described. A figure standing motionless in the shadows. It was the third officer. This time Harris could see him clearly. His face was pale, almost sickly, his eyes dark pools that seemed to absorb the light around him. His uniform was pristine, too perfect, as though it had never been worn. And yet, there was something about him that seemed wrong. "Who the hell are you?" Harris asked, his voice shaking. He had to speak. He couldn't stand the silence any longer. The officer didn't answer. He just stood there, his head tilted slightly to the side. His eyes never left Harris, and there was a cold, unsettling calm about him. Daniels took a step back, his voice barely above a whisper. "Harris, he's not real. He's not." Before he could finish his sentence, the officer raised his hand. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for a pen that was clipped to his uniform. And then, as though guided by some invisible force, he began to write. Harris stared at him, paralyzed by the sight. The officer's hand moved with precision, but it was as if he wasn't really writing. It was as if the pen was being moved by some unseen force, a force that had no place in this world. The officer's gaze never wavered as he wrote, the name slowly forming on the paper. And then, as the final letter was written, the pen stopped. Harris couldn't breathe. His heart pounded in his chest, and the room felt suffocating. The name written on the paper was his own. "Officer Harris," Daniels whispered, his voice cracking. "What the hell does this mean?" Before either of them could react, the officer turned slowly and began to walk toward the door. His footsteps were heavy, echoing in the silence. Harris and Daniels followed, unable to move, as if they were drawn into the officer's presence by some dark force. But when they reached the door, the officer was gone. There was no sign of him. Nothing but the empty warehouse and the strange, unnerving silence that surrounded them. Harris turned to Daniels, his mind racing. What did we just see? Was that real? Daniels shook his head, his face pale. I don't know, but we have to figure this out. This isn't just a coincidence. The air around them seemed to grow colder, and Harris felt the weight of something pressing down on him, suffocating him. It wasn't just the strange officer. It was something deeper, something darker, something that wasn't meant to be seen. And as they left the warehouse that night, neither of them could shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the third officer, the one who should never have existed, was still out there, waiting for them to unravel the mystery. They didn't know it yet, but they were already part of a twisted game. And soon, they would learn that no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't escape the curse that came with the third officer's name. The days after that night in the warehouse were filled with an unease neither Harris nor Daniels could shake. They went through the motions of their shifts, patrolling the streets, checking in on calls, but all the while, their minds were occupied by the same thought. The third officer. That man. The one who should not have existed. Harris had tried to dismiss it at first. He told himself that he had imagined it, that Daniels had imagined it, that it was some weird trick of the mind. But when the name had been written in the officer's handwriting, his own name, he couldn't ignore it anymore. They both knew that something was wrong, but neither of them knew how deep the problem ran. It was as though they had opened a door they couldn't close. And the longer they stayed in this cursed precinct, the more they felt like they were being drawn into something that had no way out. The feeling of being watched, that heavy presence, never left them. It clung to their every step, their every move. Every time they reviewed the CCTV footage, every time they went out on patrol, the shadow of the third officer loomed over them. It wasn't just the haunting vision of him standing beside their cruiser. It was the deeper, darker sensation that something was happening beyond their control. On that fateful night, as Harris and Daniels were finishing up a routine check, they had no idea that tonight would be different. They didn't know that they were walking right into the trap that had been set for them, one they hadn't even realized existed. The night air was colder than usual, the wind picking up as they made their way down the streets. The city was quiet, too quiet, and the only sounds were the faint hum of streetlights and the occasional rustling of trees. Harris's mind wandered as he drove, his gaze flickering toward the rearview mirror. For a moment, he thought he saw something in the reflection, a figure standing just out of sight. But when he looked back, there was nothing. "You okay, Harris?" Daniels asked, glancing over at him. "Yeah," Harris said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just tired. It's been a long night." They pulled up to a familiar intersection, one they'd driven through countless times. But tonight, something felt off. The streetlights flickered as they approached, casting long shadows across the pavement. As they passed the old diner on the corner, Harris felt his heart skip a beat. There, standing by the door, was the third officer. But this time it was different. This time, the officer wasn't standing motionless. He was walking, slowly, deliberately, down the sidewalk toward them. Harris slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt as Daniels' hand shot out to steady himself. "That's him," Daniels said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's the officer from the footage." Harris's pulse quickened, and he grabbed for the radio. "Dispatch, we need backup. We've got an officer down. Possible suspect near the old diner." There was no response, only static. Come on," Harris muttered under his breath, trying to make the radio work, but the static continued, relentless, mocking him. Meanwhile, the officer continued to approach them, his steps unervingly steady. Harris felt a coldness seep into his bones as he watched the figure draw closer. His skin prickled, his hands trembling as he reached for his service weapon. "Don't shoot," Daniels warned, his voice shaking. He's not real, Harris. He can't be." Harris stared at him, confusion written all over his face. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Just wait," Daniels said, his eyes wide with panic. "This is like the footage, remember? The officer, it's always the same." But Harris couldn't bring himself to just wait. He wasn't going to stand there and watch some ghost walk toward him without doing something. He raised his weapon, aiming it at the officer's chest. "Harris, don't," Daniels yelled. But it was too late. Harris fired. The sound of the gunshot echoed in the air, sharp and immediate. But the officer didn't flinch. He didn't even acknowledge the shot. He simply kept walking, his expression cold, unreadable. "Damn it," Harris cursed, his hands shaking as he tried to steady himself. He couldn't understand what was happening. Why wasn't the officer reacting? Why wasn't he? And then it hit him. The officer wasn't moving. Not like a normal person. Not like someone who had been shot. He wasn't moving like a man at all. He was moving like something else. Something unnatural. Harris's blood ran cold. He turned to Daniels, but the other officer wasn't looking at him. Daniels was staring at the figure, his face pale, his mouth agape. "Daniels, what's going on?" Harris asked, panic creeping into his voice. Daniels didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulling out his phone. He quickly scrolled through the footage they had taken earlier, when they had first seen the third officer. And then he froze. "Harris," Daniels whispered. "He wasn't in the footage. He was never there." Harris's stomach turned as he looked over at the screen. The officer, they could see him now clearly, but there was no record of him. No mention of his appearance. Nothing. "No," Harris said, backing up toward the car. "This isn't real. This is just some kind of trick." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The officer was real, and he was right in front of them. "Run!" Daniels shouted, his voice breaking the trance Harris had fallen into. Without thinking, Harris spun around and bolted toward the car. They didn't need to say another word. Their instincts had already kicked in. As they climbed into the cruiser and slammed the doors shut, the officer stopped. For a moment, there was silence. And then, without warning, the officer's face appeared at the window. It was as though he had always been there, always watching, always waiting for the right moment to show himself. Harris's breath caught in his throat as the officer raised his hand and tapped on the window with a slow, deliberate motion. The tapping echoed in the small space of the cruiser, each tap like a heartbeat, louder, sharper, as though the officer's presence was expanding inside the car, suffocating them. And then, just as suddenly as it had all started, the officer was gone, vanished, like smoke in the wind. Harris turned to Daniels, his heart racing. "What the hell is happening?" Daniels didn't answer. He was staring out of the windshield, his face pale. And then, with a trembling hand, Daniels pointed to the rearview mirror. There, standing in the reflection, was the third officer. And this time, he was smiling. The night had stretched on forever, as if the hours themselves had been drawn out to make Harris and Daniels pay for their curiosity, for the decisions they'd made to face the impossible. They sat there in the car, the eerie silence of the street surrounding them like an oppressive fog. The third officer, the officer that shouldn't be there, had disappeared from the window, but he lingered in their minds like a shadow, more menacing now than ever. I don't understand," Harris muttered, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. "What the hell is going on?" Daniels didn't answer immediately. He just stared out into the distance, as though waiting for something, waiting for the inevitable. His face was ashen, and Harris could see the tremble in his hands as he gripped the door handle. "Daniels?" Harris asked, his voice trembling now. He could feel the weight of the silence between them, suffocating. "What's happening? Why is this happening?" Daniels swallowed hard. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "I told you, he's not real." Harris's heart dropped. He turned to Daniels, trying to process what he was hearing. "What do you mean? He's not real?" "Of course he's real. I saw him. I heard him. No," Daniels cut in. "He's not real. Not in the way we understand real. He's part of something else. Something that's beyond us." Harris shook his head, unable to comprehend. He leaned forward, his palms pressed against the cool metal of the dashboard. "What are you talking about? What do you mean, part of something else?" Daniels paused, staring ahead at the empty street before them. His eyes were distant, as though he was staring into some unseen abyss. "The third officer, he's the one who's always going to die. Every time." Harris's confusion deepened, and his chest tightened. "What are you talking about, Daniels? What do you mean, always going to die?" Daniels turned to look at him, his eyes filled with an unspoken terror. "He's not part of our world. He's a warning, a symbol of the death that's coming. A constant reminder that no one escapes." "Not really." Harris blinked, trying to process the weight of Daniels' words. It didn't make sense. He didn't want to believe it, but something deep inside him told him that there was more truth to this than he could handle. He didn't want to know the truth. "The reports," Daniels continued, voice strained. "Didn't you notice? Every time we see him, it's the same. He's there in the footage, but there's never any record of him. No one remembers his name. No one knows him, and yet he's there every single time. He's always been there. He's always the third officer." Harris felt cold sweat bead on his forehead as the realization sank in. He remembered the first time he'd noticed the officer in the footage, the name that was written, the officer's face, the way he didn't belong. And now it all clicked. The third officer wasn't a ghost, not exactly. He was a figure tied to something more sinister, something cyclical, and every officer, every shift would be drawn to him. Suddenly, a chilling thought struck Harris, one that twisted his stomach into a tight knot. "But, Daniels, if he's the third officer, then does that mean?" Daniels didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew what was coming. The third officer was the one who always died. "No one survives him, Harris," Daniels whispered, barely audible. "Not one officer. The third officer is the death of us all. The cycle is relentless." Just as Harris was about to speak again, something shifted in the air. A cold draft swept through the car, and a low static buzz emanated from the radio. The sound was familiar. It was the same interference they had heard just before the third officer had appeared in the footage. Harris turned to the radio, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached for the dial, turning it up, and then, through the static, he heard it. A voice, his voice. "You're next." The words sent a jolt of ice through his veins. It was his voice, but not his words. The voice was distorted, almost hollow, as if it had been stretched out across time itself. "Harris!" Daniels shouted, his voice full of panic. He reached for the door, ready to escape, but Harris stopped him. "Don't," Harris said, his voice shaking. "We're not getting out of here, not unless we understand what's going on. We need to figure out what he wants." But Daniels wasn't listening. He was already halfway out the door, his face pale and frantic. "We can't just sit here, Harris. We have to go. We have to." Before Daniels could finish, the unmistakable figure of the third officer appeared again, this time standing directly in front of the car. His face was calm, serene, as though nothing at all was wrong. His uniform was pristine, untouched by time or the chaos that surrounded them. Daniels froze, his body trembling as he stared at the officer. His eyes were wide with terror, and his voice caught in his throat. "No!" Daniels whispered, his face going pale. The third officer didn't move. He simply stared at them, as if waiting for something they couldn't possibly understand. The air felt thick now, suffocating. Harris felt a strange pressure in his chest, and he found it hard to breathe. He glanced at Daniels, who was gripping the doorframe as though he were ready to flee at any moment. "Harris," Daniels said, his voice barely audible. I can't stay here. I can't die like this." But before he could make a move, the third officer stepped forward, his face cold and expressionless. Without a word, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper, and handed it to Harris. Harris took the paper with trembling hands, feeling his heart thud in his chest. As he unfolded it, he saw the words written on it, written in familiar handwriting. "You're next." And then, as if the officer had never been there at all, the figure was gone. Daniels stared at the empty street, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We're next, Harris. We're all next." And as the silence enveloped them once again, they both knew the truth. There was no escaping the cycle. There was no running from the third officer. The third officer was the death they could never outrun. And now it was their turn. And the third story is Burn Code 66, Chapter 1, The Voice in the Dark. It was a night like any other at the precinct, dark, quiet, and unnervingly still. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the faint static crackling over the radio were the only sounds breaking the oppressive silence. Officer Daniel Royce sat behind his desk, eyes glued to the screen of his computer. It was another mundane shift, the kind that made every second feel like an eternity. He had been working the graveyard shift for years now, and though the hours were long and the work tedious, there was always a certain calm about it. A calm that was shattered by a voice on the other side of the radio. "Code 66, the voice crackled through, a sharp and unexpected transmission that made Royce freeze mid-sentence. "Code 66. The words echoed in his mind like a curse, his heart skipping a beat. The fire code, an emergency so dire that it could never be initiated. Not by anyone. The protocol, according to department records, had been written in the dark days of the past when corrupt officers needed to be purged. It was a fire trigger, one that would burn an entire building to the ground, consuming everything in its path. No one dared activate it, not even in the most desperate of circumstances. But there it was, coming through the airwaves, the voice unmistakable and all too familiar. The voice on the other side was almost identical to Royce's own. "Code 66. Activate." The voice came again, sending a chill down Royce's spine. It sounded like his own voice, a perfect imitation. But that was impossible. Royce hadn't said anything. He hadn't even picked up the radio to speak. This voice, it was someone else, someone who had no business activating the code. Royce's eyes widened as he leaned forward, staring at the radio with disbelief. There was no mistaking it. The voice was coming from somewhere. Someone within the station. But who? He quickly checked the roster of officers on duty. There was no one nearby who should have been calling in the command. And yet, the radio crackled again, louder this time, the words unmistakable. Code 66. You have been warned. The room suddenly felt colder, as though the temperature had dropped several degrees in a split second. Royce's breath came out in visible puffs. He shook his head, trying to process the chaos unfolding. He had heard of the Code 66 protocol in whispers, rumors among the older officers that it was more than just a protocol. It was a punishment designed for officers who had crossed a line, done something unforgivable. But those were just stories, just ghost stories passed down like fables. This wasn't supposed to happen. The dispatch center, located several floors below, lit up with alarms. He could hear the faint sound of sirens, the crackling of the comms, but there was no one to answer. Everyone was already scrambling, as if the fire had already begun. Royce stood up, rushing to the window of the observation booth. He could see the bright orange glow in the distance, the unmistakable firelight reflecting off the glass. It was real. Code 66 had been activated. The building was on fire, and yet something didn't add up. Royce ran down the stairs, his boots echoing through the empty hallway. He could feel the heat building around him, the flames licking at the edges of the walls. As he reached the lower levels, the stench of smoke was overwhelming, filling his lungs and causing his chest to tighten with every breath. But even with the thick smoke clouding his vision, he could still see the strange figure standing in the doorway, an officer, his uniform half obliterated by the blaze, his face obscured in shadow. "Who the hell are you?" Royce called out, his voice hoarse from the smoke. The figure didn't answer. It only stared back at him, standing motionless in the doorway, a haunting presence in the chaos of the fire. The flames danced around the officer like they were part of him, swirling, twisting, almost alive. Royce felt a deep unease settle in his gut. He had seen enough in his years on the force to know that this wasn't a natural fire. This wasn't the kind of blaze caused by an accident or an electrical malfunction. It was deliberate, intentional, and that officer, standing there as if untouched by the flames, was part of it. Royce turned to run, but the heat was unbearable. He could feel the burn on his skin, the skin-tightening heat that threatened to consume him. He needed to get out, but his legs wouldn't move fast enough. The fire was closing in on him, the crackle of the flames growing louder with every passing second. As he reached the exit door, he slammed his hand against the handle, only to find it locked. The handle wouldn't budge. Panic set in. He banged his fists against the door, his throat burning with each breath he took. He could hear the officer's footsteps behind him, slow and steady, just before he felt a hand land on his shoulder. Cold, as cold. Royce whipped around, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The officer was right there, standing too close. And when he spoke, his voice was unmistakably Royce's own. "Your turn is coming." Before Royce could respond, the officer vanished. Just like that, disappeared into the smoke and the flames. The building continued to burn around him, and as the sirens wailed in the distance, Royce realized the true horror of what had just happened. Code 66 had been activated. A fire protocol that was meant to purge the corrupt, but it had done something far worse. It had trapped someone innocent. And as Royce made his way through the inferno, he understood that the fire wasn't finished yet. It would keep spreading until it had claimed its prize. The fire had been extinguished, or so they thought. The next morning, after hours of battling the flames and ensuring that every last ember had been stamped out, the precinct stood eerily silent. The damage was extensive. The upper floors, where the dispatch room had been, were completely charred, the walls blackened beyond recognition. The air still smelled of smoke, and the ground was littered with burnt debris. But the most chilling thing wasn't the damage, it was the bodies. The fire had claimed its toll, that much was clear. The body count was tragically high, but there was one more body than expected. One more victim who shouldn't have been there. Officer Nathaniel Harris, A seasoned cop who had worked in the precinct for nearly 2 decades had not been accounted for in the official roster. According to the records, he had left the building hours before the fire started. His last known whereabouts had been the parking lot, ready to go home. Yet, his body was found amidst the ashes of the upper floor, near the dispatch center. Royce stared at the body in the morgue, his mind racing. He had seen this man every day for years. He had been in the precinct when Royce had first started. But now, here he was, lifeless, his uniform singed from the flames. What had he been doing there? How had he ended up back in the building, after everyone believed he had left? The answer didn't come to him right away, but the question gnawed at him. How had he ended up there? What was he doing during the fire? Royce couldn't stop thinking about the voice on the radio that had activated code 66. It had sounded so much like his own, yet somehow different, like a distorted version of himself. But the voice didn't belong to him or anyone else he knew. There had been no mention of anyone calling for the code. No officer had taken responsibility for it. It had come from nowhere. With a sense of growing dread, Royce returned to the scene of the fire. The cleanup crew had cleared out most of the wreckage, but the air still felt heavy, thick with unanswered questions. He stepped cautiously through the remains of the dispatch center, every step feeling as though the ground beneath him could give way at any moment. The walls were scorched, the glass windows shattered, and the ceiling had collapsed in places, leaving jagged metal beams exposed. But as he moved deeper into the wreckage, something caught his eye. It was a small object, almost insignificant but somehow important. Pen. It lay on the charred desk in the middle of the room, untouched by the flames. Its surface was scuffed, worn from years of use, but it was the name written on it that sent a chill down Royce's spine. Royce. His own name. The pen had his name engraved on it, his name, but the handwriting wasn't his. It was as though someone had written it with deliberate care. The ink was smudged, but unmistakable. Royce felt his blood run cold. He knew he wasn't imagining things. Something was wrong, very wrong. He picked up the pen and turned it over in his hand, inspecting it. It felt familiar yet foreign at the same time. It was like a piece of him had been left behind, as though the fire had taken a part of him with it. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and a terrible thought began to form in his mind. What if this wasn't just an accident? What if Code 66 had been something much more sinister than a simple fire protocol? What if the fire wasn't a result of malfunction, but a deliberate act of retribution? What if someone or something was controlling it? The thought was impossible to shake. Royce made his way to the basement, where the old fire protocols were stored. He needed answers, and the only way to find them was to go through the records. The fire had been accidental, they said, but accidents didn't leave bodies behind, and accidents didn't call for a Code 66 activation that came from nowhere. The records were disorganized, dusty, and ancient. They spoke of corruption, of officers long past, their names scribbled in ink that had long since faded. But as Royce flipped through the pages, he found something that made his heart skip a beat. Code 66, Activation Procedure. 4 situations involving high-risk purging. Authorized only for use when judgment has been passed on a corrupt officer or entity. Activation results in the complete immolation of the target area. All personnel present in the target area are considered a part of the process. No survivors. Royce's hands shook as he read the words. The code had never been meant for anyone else. It had been designed to eliminate corruption within the department, a way to rid the force of officers who had crossed the line. But what if it wasn't just for the corrupt anymore? What if it was evolving, spreading like an infection, claiming more than just the guilty? He slammed the book shut and turned to leave, but before he could reach the stairs, something caught his eye. A reflection in the glass. Royce froze. He saw his own face in the window. His reflection was clear, but there was something else. A shadow, dark and indistinct, standing just behind him. He spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there. No one. The basement was empty, as it should have been. But the feeling lingered. The feeling that someone or something was watching him, following him. And it wasn't just the fire that was following him. It was the curse of Code 66. A curse that, once activated, could never be stopped. And Royce had unwittingly become a part of it. The flames hadn't just destroyed the building, they had trapped him. The fire would follow him now, burning through the streets and across precincts until it found a new home. Royce didn't know how long he had, but he knew one thing for sure. Code 66 wasn't over. It had just begun. Royce couldn't shake the feeling that he was being hunted. The days following the fire had been a blur, a fevered rush of interviews, reports, and investigations. But none of it seemed to matter. The fire had left something behind, a mark on him that no amount of paperwork could erase. And it wasn't just the charred remains of the precinct that haunted him. The body count from the fire had been reviewed, and the forensic team had confirmed the worst. There was one extra body. Not just a victim, but someone whose presence had never been accounted for. Officer Nathaniel Harris, the man who shouldn't have been there. He hadn't been in the building when the fire started, and yet, he had been found amidst the ashes. Royce had known Nathaniel for years. The man had been a fixture in the precinct, a quiet, dependable officer who never made waves. But now he was dead, his body an enigma that the investigators couldn't solve. No one had seen him enter the building after he was supposedly off duty, and yet, there he was, burned, as if the fire had somehow summoned him back. The eerie thing wasn't just that Nathaniel had died in the fire. It was the way it had all happened. The extra body, the strange voice on the radio, and now the pen with Royce's name on it, had all come together in a terrifying way that no one could explain. Royce was no closer to answers, but he was closer to the truth. Code 66 was more than just a fire protocol. It was a weapon, curse, a trap. He hadn't realized how deep it ran until he started digging into the department's records. Late one night, while the rest of the station was asleep, Royce found an old file buried deep in the archives. It was labeled Code 66, Final Activation. The file was brittle, yellowed with age, and as soon as he opened it, he knew it wasn't just about a fire. It was about something far more sinister. The document explained that Code 66 wasn't just used to eliminate corrupt officers. It was a form of punishment, a way to trap souls within the flames. The fire wasn't just a blaze. It was a gateway, a portal through which the souls of the damned would pass. And once they were inside, they would never escape. The file spoke of a ritual, one that had been performed centuries ago by the founding officers of the department. They had used it to rid the force of those who were corrupt, to cleanse the department of its sins. But over time, the ritual had become twisted. It had become a tool for something far darker. The fire was no longer just for the guilty. It began to claim the innocent as well. The realization hit Royce like a physical blow. The extra body found in the fire wasn't just an oversight. It was a part of the curse, a victim who had been chosen by the fire. And the worst part? Royce had triggered it. Code 66 hadn't just been activated accidentally. It had been activated because Royce had been in the right place at the wrong time. The fire had been waiting for him, waiting for someone to open the door. And now it was following him. Everywhere Royce went, he felt the weight of it. The fire was no longer confined to the ruins of the precinct. It was in his thoughts, in his dreams, in the whispers of the streets. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't outrun it. He tried to talk to his fellow officers about it, but no one seemed to understand. They didn't know what he had uncovered. They didn't know about the file, about the ritual, about the curse. They only knew that the fire had been a tragedy, and that they needed to move on. But Royce couldn't move on. Not when the fire was still burning in his mind. The worst part was the voice that had triggered Code 66. Royce had heard it again, faintly, through the radio during a night shift. It sounded like his own voice, but distorted, like it had been twisted by the flames themselves. The voice had said the same thing it had said before. Code 66 activated. Proceed with the burn. He couldn't escape it. It was as though the fire had marked him, chosen him. And the more he tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to pull him in. Royce's mind raced as he paced the halls of the precinct, trying to make sense of everything. What was happening to him? Why was he the one being targeted? What had he done to deserve this? It was then that he realized something chilling. The fire hadn't just chosen Nathaniel Harris. It had chosen him too. The extra body wasn't just a victim. It was a participant. A new soul trapped in the fire, forced to relive the same nightmare over and over again, until it was consumed by the flames. And Royce had become part of that cycle. Every time Code 66 was triggered, a new soul would be claimed, and that soul would join the others in the burning inferno. The fire had no end. It only fed. Royce's breathing quickened as the weight of the realization hit him. The fire wasn't something that could be stopped. It was a force beyond his control, a malevolent presence that had been unleashed. And the worst part was that it wasn't over. It was just beginning. He had become a part of the curse, whether he wanted to or not. The fire had claimed its first victim, but it wasn't finished yet. Royce knew that now. He wasn't the first to be burned, and he wouldn't be the last. Every time the fire raged, it would claim another soul, another officer, another innocent, and he couldn't stop it. But Royce couldn't give up. Not yet. There had to be a way to break the cycle. There had to be a way to end the curse once and for all. And he was going to find it. And that's the end of today's story, my friends. What do you think? Is Code 66 truly a curse? Or is it something even darker than we can comprehend? The fire may never stop burning, but you can always count on Mr. DarXnights to bring you more chilling tales. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more creepy bedtime horrors. And remember, you can always come back for more dark stories right here on Mr. DarXnights. Until next time, sleep tight, if you can.